Morning.
Good morning.
How's it going?
Happy New Year. All right.
It is the new year. Mark has a flu today, so he won't be joining.
Oof. Okay.
We'll see who else we get. I think Chris has been online already this morning, so he's probably up.
Okay. Yeah, I was looking forward to hearing Mark's take because he had read the whole thing through. I didn't realize going into the book that the book actually covered the ouster of Altman and return and so forth,
Mm,
which was none of it was new ground,
mm.
and a lot of it was very familiar, but there was a handful of interesting pieces that made sense of an awful lot of things
Mhm.
that I hadn't quite caught.
Okay, yeah. What were the surprises?
Um, just sort of how it happened because I hadn't really sort of setting up the ouster, um, and then just sort of the backtracking of I'll wait for Chris.
Okay.
We
Okay.
can
Hey,
hold for
Chris.
a minute.
So we're probably all here now because Mark is under the weather, so he's not going to join us this week. So, hello, Mark. He said he was going to watch, and that way he'll at least hear the end of it and know what we're going to take up next week, which will probably be the first section of the new Weird book. But in the meantime, Thomas was okay. Thanks, Eric. Thomas was kind of saying that he was kind of familiar with, but it was still sort of surprised by some of the things at the end in the story of the ouster and return of Sam. So I was surprised. I mean, personally, I was surprised at sort of how, I don't know, kind of petty it got, and just sort of backstabbing. Kind of he said, she said to him, but not to him, and then
Um,
all that.
Well,
it-
what was surprising to me was that almost all of it was geared towards Sam lying and telling everybody what they wanted to hear, which is,
yep.
and the patterns he shows are, I have seen dozens of times from all kinds of mostly cisgender white guys in the tech space.
Hmm.
I've also
Yeah.
seen a lot of it in Hollywood and entertainment
Sure.
where nobody wants to say no, so you say yes, you yes them to death, but
Yeah.
your yes 90% of the time even means no.
Right.
When you're saying, oh yeah, this will be great, we'll do X, Y, and Z, and meanwhile the plans for making X, Y, and Z will never surface.
Hmm.
But to keep people happy, you tell them yes, and you let somebody else be the bad guy and say no.
Right.
Yeah.
But what was interesting to me was after the ouster and the shakeup, he manages, and broadly I presume because it wasn't really directly reported, Sam comes in and tells everybody yes behind the scenes again, brings them all back together because only a few people really seem to have the knowledge that he's lying to everyone.
Yeah.
So, because that does not become the bigger part of the story, we're getting rid of Sam because Sam has been actively lying to everyone, and that's what's holding things up. And then that brings them all back together, and then all the people who were aware of all the lying then all leave. Like all the senior executives who were aware of his chicanery are all
Mhm.
either nudged out, pushed out, or decide to leave for themselves because they can't take the toxicity. And then, this cycle starts again. Um, but to me, that was kind of the story of this section.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, the most important part to me, and I think probably to many of us, were the last two sections, or at least the last chapter about power and what's going on and where can we go from here, and the equity questions about how do you center things like, the example of the indigenous group in New Zealand. taking control of their tiny little space and saying, we're going to oversee this piece and then only license it out when it makes sense to us. To me, that was really all of the meat in this. All really not even in the whole book. The whole book generally was of interest and value, but to me, like that one chapter,
Hmm.
I think was really where the real meat of the thing was for me.
Hmm. Well, and
Hmm.
that sort of struck me also as kind of one of those sort of practical functionality things, where we're sort of negotiating with the definition of kind of what AI actually is, and what a language model is. Is this specific enough to be um, understood differently, right? In the same way that I guess a couple of weeks ago when we talked, it sort of struck me that that AlphaFold was a different thing than a language model would
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, there's a, I want to say wide array of technologies within AI, but it's probably around like 12 to 15.
Hmm.
And generative AI is just sort of one of them and is more of a front facing,
Yeah.
and just sort of, you know, a human-esque interface to technologies all based on, probability engines and sort of rough Markov chains. But
Hmm.
it's just, and there's an awful lot of other stuff that's really helpful. And in the book, there was a little bit of mixing of technologies.
Hmm.
And like in general press covering AI, an awful lot of what they're talking about is sort of the Gen AI with LLMs.
Yeah.
Um, and
And that gets kind of conflated with everything.
yeah, and it's like, there are things where, an awful lot of the successes, and particularly around sciences and engineering, Gen AI is not what is being used with the large successes of being able to find, doing molecule testing to find cures for things and digital
Hmm.
twin sort of testing. It is somewhat discriminative models and then other sort of other variants,
Right.
but it's not the Gen AI side of things. And
Hmm.
for most of the others, the Gen AI side is sort of seen as what the kiddies do. Um, and so it's not the serious sort of AI side of things.
Hmm.
But like the two pieces that kind of struck me, and with Sam doing the yes to everybody was, and just sort of causing an awful lot of problems in doing that, which was one of the things he was notorious for at Y Combinator and really not liked there. Um, that was known, and just sort of the caustic nature at OpenAI prior to him leaving. Like within the prior year, I knew a couple people who were there for about 6 months and are like, we got to get out. They're like, great ideas. We loved what it was founded on and what the core belief was, but we don't know that the core belief is actually what they're doing. And also is just an insanely toxic environment.
Hmm.
Um, and everybody is just siloed into their small teams, and you get scolded for talking across and coordinating, and they're just like, it's really problematic. But the pieces that kind of stuck out, which I hadn't run across before, was both um, Setskaya and I'm blanking on her name, not Mia, um, but the woman who's the CTO,
Hmm.
both going to Toner and essentially are afraid to be seen talking to her and letting it be known that what is going on, and they're not coordinating internally, but essentially everybody's going, I can't tell you this, don't let anybody else know, and they're all telling the same story about Sam, and just sort of being very fearful, and just sort of that sort of fear piece is really bad. I'm like, just insanely toxic and problematic. And I'm like, that's usually a company that you just want to shut down or split up, find a new leader. And I've long felt that having Altman come back was detrimental to OpenAI, and they really haven't. Their models have not really advanced. It's essentially the same thing, not really improved much. And they lost. Not only did they lose the top folks, but they lost an awful lot of the top engineers the layer down and the next layer down.
Mm-hmm.
They all moved off.
Right.
And it is really well known just how toxic an environment that OpenAI was, and they never went to clean up that reputation. And so the top folks, OpenAI is not where they go to. They'll head toward Anthropic. And when Jan LeCun was at Meta, he was usually able to draw folks in because he now has left. But working with him was like a huge draw, and being able to work there. It wasn't necessarily working with Meta or what they were working on, but working with him because he's one of the few that is still far ahead of everybody else and thinking about things and working on things.
Yeah.
And assembles good folks.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece was the Tomer piece, but then also just sort of Brockman leaving and sort of coming back, but they never dealt with Brockman. And that was, Sam was a huge issue, but Brockman was the other piece and sort of the toxic piece.
Oh.
And he doesn't really surface much outside. And this was like the first peak that I had seen of just sort of what happened to him. And I thought it was just really odd that he's kind of had to come back because everybody else left. And Sam was probably like, we've got serious problems. You need to come back. And that was like the last thing that should happen. And sort of, there's an underlying layer as I was reading it, and just sort of, just with Nadella at Microsoft and not understanding what a mess was going on at OpenAI and what he was actually dealing with, and not having the information or not being able to discern that keeping Altman was, because the offer was on the table to hire Altman and to bring everybody who wanted to follow Altman to Microsoft.
Right.
And he had no clue that was an insanely bad idea. And that didn't really get brought up in the book, but I'm like, I kept on waiting for that shoe to drop. And I'm just like, that is just a large problem that just.
So what do you think is the counterfactual there? What would the present now have looked like had they gone that way, had they not brought Sam back, but sort of recreated OpenAI under the Microsoft flag?
I think they would have had the same problems within Microsoft. And because when they partnered with Microsoft, initially, Microsoft wiped a large chunk of their AI team initially, and they wiped their whole safety team and ethics team. I think it was like 50 or 60 people they just let go.
Yeah.
I was like, this is the one thing that you need to have.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there are not enough people doing reviews on it, and you wiped out your own team to validate. You need to have somebody validating that what's going on is actually working and not being, malicious or, with intent, or, just the AI kind of going off the rails.
Yeah.
And so that just seems really odd, but I think Nadella believed, he may have not, I don't know. I think he believed that Sam is a good talker. He's not really technical. There's an awful lot of stuff he doesn't understand, but he sounds like he understands, and he talks in large terms, and had sort of him standing himself up as the one true way to get to AGI, and it's in the near future, and I'm the only one who can bring it to everybody.
Yeah.
And AGI is, still 5 years off or so. It's not really close.
Right. Well, and that I'm very curious about that as well, because it seems very much like a shell game as we're getting to the end here. Because I think that an argument could be made that the reason that this sort of devolved into all of this politics and craziness was that it had really peaked. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm sort of, as I was reading all of this, he said, she said, this person went to talk to this other person,
Yeah.
I was trying to sort of coordinate that with, you know, releases. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
so you get 4.0, and then, and then it's sort of like, what is it?
Yeah.
Well, and I think you sort of see that also, and Thomas, you sort of reference this, the folks that were behind the ouster, who I suspect had seen the whatever the diminishing returns on scaling
Yep.
coming,
Mhm.
have all left and sort of decided to pursue the other patterns that I think they had intended to.
Yep.
Dan, the one thing that occurs to me about the counterfactual
Hmm.
of whatever Altman and close cohort going to Microsoft is Microsoft would then not have started partnering on other models like
Hmm.
the Chinese models or so forth, right? They would have been further in bed with the scaling contention and would be even more in pain than they seem to be now.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean that was sort of what struck me was that they would have, um, because I think that the kind of the core idea that Altman was pursuing was sort of played out.
Right.
And so, and
Hmm.
so Microsoft would have just inherited that, that kind of played out
but then would also have
belief that
invested
AGI is going to be brute forced right around the corner.
exactly, and they wouldn't
Yeah.
have looked at the other ideas, even though those other models are generally scaling based.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
seems to me from the outside.
Yeah.
At least there's a what's the at least there's you know a bit of diversity, a bit of evolutionary diversity that you can go from.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do have a question if anybody else noticed it, because it was somewhat subtle and in a book where the title Empire appears in it, and I thought she had mentioned Napoleon earlier on.
Yeah.
She
Hmm.
mentions at the beginning of chapter
Chapter
18,
18. Yeah.
Napoleon in this biography that Altman has read, and the
It,
direct quote from Altman,
it,
obviously deeply flawed human, but man, impressive, is his
it,
description of Napoleon. And then Tyler Cowen asks about his insights, and Altman, again, a direct quote, his incredible understanding of human psychology. So there's this direct analogy she's making. She's making it as a side analogy, really, but I read it as a direct one.
yeah.
Here's Sam Altman, here's Napoleon. They're both doing things that psychologically humans generally don't do to each other in small scale society. But
Yeah.
because it's larger scale society, we can do this other thing, which I also see parallels to what Donald Trump is doing in terms of running an administration and how he came to power. And then there's the example that Napoleon failed miserably and is sent off to Elba. And,
Yeah.
so as she's drawing up the end of this book, she makes this analogy, which I take as a prediction of 3 or 4 years from now, Altman's going to be sent off somewhere to his little island, and
Or he was, and he came back, and now we're waiting for
Yeah.
water.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's possible too. And when does Waterloo come, and then does he get sent off or not?
But yeah, the distinction is
Yeah.
that he owns Elba rather
Yep.
than
Um, but then she
yeah.
also follows this up with ideas of colonialism and overtaking other people's power and subsuming it into the bigger empire. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should we be more human centered? I don't want to use the word anthropic, but you know, although I don't think it was really in this section. I think it was in the last week's reading where she kind of talks about anthropic and says, they were kind of different in kind, but not in quality.
Mhm.
And Anthropic was just as bad as OpenAI as they kind of left and went off to do their own thing. So it was philosophical differences, but then they leave and recreate the same exact thing. Um, but that then I think is a side note to the bigger thesis she's got here of what is OpenAI doing as a bigger leader in the space. And let's follow this one example from start to finish
Well,
as a
Yeah.
proxy
There-
for what everybody else may or may not be doing.
and this reminds me of Thomas, what you were saying a couple of weeks ago about, people like what's his name, David Sachs.
Mhm.
This sort of idea that that these people are sort of Wile E. Coyote super genius level
Mhm.
people, right? I mean, and this understanding, this sort of Walter Isaacson level understanding of Napoleon. Oh, he's a complicated character. Well, he is a complicated character, but I don't think that anybody who's talking about Napoleon, including Altman and including this author, really understands Napoleon. And so,
Mhm.
so I think that may be kind of an interesting, sort of a side element of this. In the same way that we, that Isaacson, writes this biography of Elon Musk when he's, less than halfway through his life, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, come on, you guys, just stop dabbling in this.
Well, the
Yeah.
other piece that's there, because I think historians and people in general tend to want to buy into this great man theory of history, is yes, there may be this great man, but then who are the people around him that allow them to get away with what they're doing, that
Mhm.
empower him, but that who are doing the work on the ground? So she opens this entire section up with this woman who acts as an intermediary for Altman to do the communication amongst all the senior group and is
Right.
actually doing the day-to-day running of the company
And
and
has
keeping
much
it
more of a
afloat
handle on the nuts and bolts. Yeah.
and moving it along, whereas Altman is out doing the rah-rah cheerleading and fundraising and kind of the Y Combinatory stuff he's always been good at. And
Mhm.
he's not actually doing, he may have the rose-colored glasses of, oh, I think AI can do this and it can do that. But, a, a 10th grader in high school who follows the space can do that kind of rah-rah as
Mhm.
well as any one of us could.
Yeah.
So it's, he's using his experience and his relationships to leverage the money. Meanwhile, it's other people and people like uh there's 7 or 8 other examples, and I, was kind of interested in the one, I can't remember the guy's name now, earlier on, where they were talking about security issues, like, oh, we're worried about people breaking in to our company and stealing stuff, and it's the quirky ADHD autism spectrum people that we got to worry about because they're so famous in this space. People could buddy up to them and steal our secrets out the back door, you
Social
know,
social
by
engineer them. Yeah.
social engineering senior executives. And it's
Right.
like, but Sam Altman has socially engineered those people to work on things that they find
Totally.
interesting and create a safe space for them to
Yeah.
do so. So but we do, do we have those examples in Napoleon's case of who his senior generals and, people on the ground were, who they were, how they operated, what they did to help empower Napoleon to do what he did?
Right.
And that's where the rubber meets the road. Is I'm more interested in that the stories of the second tier in this book
Yeah.
are far more fascinating, almost even than the chicanery of Sam Altman,
Mhm.
Mhm.
who seems to be the Steve Jobs-esque kind of godlike figure. But the problem is Altman doesn't have the PR team apparently that
Right.
Steve Jobs did.
Or
Right.
the knowledge of what is good,
Well, and
Which
yeah,
is
good in
so
product
which
or
is also another Walter Isaacson biography, like
exactly,
if you
yep.
right,
watch
which is,
it.
yes, exactly. But at least he was dead at that point. So but the funny thing is, I mean, if you're going to find an empire to analogize this to, Napoleon's is not the one that I would have chosen. I mean, I might have chosen, sort of the USSR between Lenin and Stalin. because there's very much of a kind of a focus on this dreamy, idealistic, rhetorical. I mean, it's almost like, I guess in my high tech experience, it's almost like, kind of sales culture versus engineering culture. I think of Altman as kind of quintessential sales culture.
Mhm.
You know,
Well, what strikes me too is, and it's just an idea about empire in general. If we go back and look historically at other empires, the kings and empires of the ancient Near East, and then Egypt and Rome, and then the Mongol Empire. You can even look at American Empire, and I still could really want to read Daniel Immerwahr's book to look at how he defines that. But
actually, I just pulled that out again for some reason. Yeah, I was just
almost
dipping into
all
that
of
last
these
week.
empires, they ultimately they cease growing, and it's only in growth that they keep their power. And
Mhm.
then when the growth stops, the merry-go-round finishes, and then they die and the whole thing collapses, is the
Yeah.
general pattern. So the question is, how much data and power can these individual groups suck in and grow and grow and grow? And then, the death is, hey, we're not getting new money from Microsoft, and in fact, I even look at that Microsoft funding as there is a thing in Hollywood that every 5 to 10 years, Hollywood shifts its major funding sources to some other external thing.
Mm,
So in the 80s, it was small conglomerations of doctors and dentists creating things like Silver Screen Partners 10
right.
is the thing that funds the movie. And then the studio system, whose job is something else, is distributing it.
Hmm.
And then it's the German newer market, and then it's, you know, hate to say it, but there were arms dealers dumping money into
Well,
Hollywood
that was what
movies
I was
for
gonna.
a
I was wondering when
while.
you were going to get to the whole money laundering,
You know,
component of it. Yeah.
it's so it's these who's the outside sucker that's pumping money into the system? And right now it might be Skydance is the multi-billionaire Larry Ellison sucker. Like I'll dump my money in as a business
Hmm.
vehicle.
Right.
Yeah. It's
Um,
the looking at the finance piece over like the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it fell down the Zitron hole. Um, he started pointing out that of all the circular money going into OpenAI, where hey, we'll give you 10 billion so you can buy our product.
We can buy our
Which,
GPUs. Yeah. Right.
yeah, and it's like everybody was giving money so that they could use their product. Except he started looking at what was actually in those deals, and it's essentially it's not a promise to do it. It's not a loan to do it. It is a consideration we can do this. So they're not even having money on the table. They're going, we have money in our pocket that may move in your direction should we see it, useful.
How do we
And
put that
just
on the balance
that's,
sheet? Yeah.
yeah. And it's just, and that drove the market value for each of the companies that were doing this because the market is not logical.
Hmm.
The stock markets don't act rationally. And they're like, oh, OpenAI is getting all this money, but there is no money that they are getting except from Oracle, who actually looked around and said, hey, all these people are giving OpenAI money. We want in on this too. And so they're the only ones who actually gave them money because they didn't understand the game. And
Right.
I'm like, you morons.
Well,
And that was one of the pieces that tanked Oracle's stock price. They're just like, people clued in on it. They're like, no, you missed the whole thing.
right.
You didn't see that this is a ruse,
You didn't backdate the
and
check.
yeah, you did not look to see which poker room you walked into.
Yeah. Well, and so how much is that, I guess I'm sort of curious then, how much is that a function of yeah, How to Hide an Empire? I do want to read that. It's too bad we got our next books, mapped out. Um, to what extent is that, I mean, because that's what this administration has been doing,
Hmm.
for the last year, right? Even before the inauguration, right? Trump was already making announcements about all of the money that he was collecting from people. All of this, we've got, I mean, if you believed the hype, it would seem as if, you know, trillions of dollars was finding its way, and people have just gotten sloppier and sloppier and sloppier about that. I mean, Scott Bessent, continues talking about, all the money that we've made on tariffs. It's like, have those checks actually cleared yet? Have we actually collected any of those actual
Yeah.
funds? So to what extent is all of this sort of facilitated by this, kind of dumbing down of the public discourse? Because I'm not saying that actually, venture capitalists make decisions based on, the stupid ways that the popular media sort of understands and expresses these types of transactions. But it does seem like a whole lot more sloppiness is being kind of gotten away with.
Yeah. Yeah. The accountability and just sort of, you know, not sort of the accountability and sort of fact checking everything, which, the SEC has been gutted, all the agencies that fact check and keep everybody in line, they've been gutted.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's nothing really there. And it's just like, it's the same, it is a very, you know, good analogy of what's going on with the funny money with OpenAI, as well as, what the administration is coming out and saying, hey, we've now, uh, stopped, 8 wars. No, let's look at those 12 wars.
Right.
Oh, and
You know,
meanwhile, we're starting a new one with
Meanwhile, we
Venezuela.
just started a new one. Yeah, yes, last night.
yeah,
So way to
we've
go.
attacked Iran.
Yeah,
Well, it's like we've gone to Venezuela. Oh, we're on the banned list for the Nobel Peace Prize.
yeah.
By doing that, oh yeah, well, no,
Well,
no, this is a
even
peaceful invasion.
even the Make
No,
America Great Again and focus on just America, we're
Yeah,
still he's dumping huge billions of dollars of money into other foreign countries
yep.
instead of giving it out in small pieces to help, spread democracy in a sense.
Yeah.
He's
But
like,
they're
oh,
not
I'm
going to
going to
give
give
him a
it to my
building with his name
dictator
on it.
friends.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, so all of this,
drag us back on topic, Dan.
drag us back on top. So so okay, so where I'll drag it back to is this question of sort of the practical functionality of AI,
Hmm.
as sort of writ large, as being, kind of publicly understood as, being language models, when the things that are actually probably much more kind of salient to valuation are, things like, protein folding and, and molecular, discovery and things like that, but also, full self-driving, right?
Hmm.
Actual, kind of physical interaction with the world. And it's kind of funny because, probably better part, if not a full year ago, I remember, there was a lot of talk on, the All In podcast about, about agentic models, right? Where these kind of assistant apps would
Hmm.
begin to be able to do things in a sequential sort of step-by-step order, right? Make me a set of reservations, for a trip to wherever, and it would
Yeah.
it would kind of go through an entire process and put together an entire, itinerary with flights and hotels, and all of that kind of stuff, which would, I mean, there would be value, that you could wring out of that. Um,
Yeah.
Well,
you know,
that's one of the things
And
that's
it's
weird here too is watching, let's say as a small example of a library space. Libraries buy books and then they give them away essentially to free for the publics around them to use. And it's physical infrastructure when you buy a book. And you'll get 20, 30 loans out of it before the book is kind of burned up and beat up and you need to replace it.
Mhm.
But it's a fixed cost what that book is. And the model has changed in the last decade to ebook licensing. So I
Mm,
know what it looks like when I get a book out of the library and it's a margin. I know what the rough marginal cost is for me as a consumer of that book. I have no idea what the marginal cost is, except that I know it's way larger
mhm,
for me to get an audiobook or a digital book. It costs the library more to
mm.
do that. And library budgets generally have been shrinking, but
Yeah.
more and more of their budgets have been going to licensing digital content, which is how a lot of their consumers want to
Do
do
you think
that
that's
stuff.
really, Chris, on a
It,
per unit basis, or is
Yeah.
it just all of the
Yeah.
it,
fixed costs that go along with
I,
sort of
I think on
so
a
applying
per unit
library,
in,
basis,
in,
it's the
in doing the
publishers have
platform?
taken a larger
You,
share
yeah.
than
so
they had been before. But the
And you,
problem is we don't see it. You don't see the cost, you don't think about it. And generally, anytime I see anyone in a Reddit space or somewhere else, and I look for this stuff.
Hmm.
When somebody says, "How much does it cost me to get that ebook?" and feeling guilty about whether they read it or not. If I get a physical book and I dip into it, but I don't actually read the whole thing, I don't feel like there's a loss in value by returning it to the library because I didn't handle it as much, I didn't use it as much. So that physical good, durable good is still great. But
Hmm.
if I check it out, I've either eaten up time period on the 1 or 2 years that they licensed it for and eaten
it's
up
number of
value
reads.
it's
because of
usually
the
number of
time,
reads, exactly.
Yeah,
or the other licensing model is number of
it's the
reads
only one.
or number of checkouts, and I've used up one of those, so
Yep.
And
I've burned money for
Hmm.
no
and
value, actual
right. And
value
it's
to
my
me.
understanding is it's measured in like single or double digits per license, right?
And
So
now,
Yep.
it can.
I think about this because yesterday I tried to go to the library and get the Pinker book to not have to buy it and have a physical copy because I want a physical copy, but I don't want to actually. It's Pinker, and I'm not sure I really want to own this book necessarily. Um, Maybe when I get halfway through it, I might decide, okay, this is worth buying, and I want my annotations in my copy rather than the library's. But
Right.
it's an experiment. So, but I think about this because it's like, okay, I've got an audio copy of it already. May or may not have a physical copy. What's the cost?
Hmm.
Similar to that, as an analogy, when we look at AI, no one is thinking when they go to Google and they do a Google search or AI search or they're using these things unless they're paying for a subscription. And my guess is the vast majority of people, unless it's a company who's bought a subscription for the company, very few people are actually paying for subscriptions for this stuff.
Right.
But they don't think about what is the per use cost in it. So it's hidden. The same way textbooks costs are hidden. The professor chooses the textbook and the student doesn't have a choice in
Yeah.
which textbook or how much am I going to pay or so the cost because someone else is making the decision, the cost gets put somewhere else. The same model happens in healthcare. You go in and you get healthcare, but you don't know before you buy it how much a thing is going to cost, how
Right.
much this treatment's going to cost. And you just like, oh, the insurance company takes care of it. And I just write a nebulous check for whatever is left over at the end.
Hmm.
And so no one's actually watching the cost of, you go to the doctor, you're not buying goods and services. Somebody else is doing all the chicanery. So you
Hmm.
have no idea what the cost is. The cost is hidden.
Yeah.
And what is the long-term thing? And the same even for Sam Altman selling the service to Microsoft. Hey, here's $6 billion. Where is the actual value when the rubber meets the road? They're buying long pie in the sky. This is going to make us multiple factor of 6 or 10 or whatever it is,
Right.
which is another big part of this story is we're going from an open model and a safety model and a help humanity model, and over the course of the entire book, that entire model shifts, and suddenly it's we're a total for-profit, let's rape and pillage the earth, and who care, damned be the costs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
The
So,
other thing
but
that
it's
coming,
following the money, and where
yeah,
every time you use an AI bot, how much energy does it use? What does it actually cost for you to touch this tool? And almost no one knows.
Mhm.
yeah, there's actually some pretty good numbers.
I
It's
mean, there's
for
good
each,
numbers, and you see people following it, but
yeah,
that knowledge and information is not in the broad, you
yeah,
know, Joe trying to get AI to write his term paper for high
yeah,
school doesn't know, doesn't care, doesn't think about it.
yeah. No, most people don't think about it at all as far as like anything other than like token costs. And it's, very much the startup model of drastically undercharge for the actual cost to get people hooked
Right.
model. And so
Which is
it's,
what libraries did, or the big publishing did with books is
yeah,
it's a fraction of the cost to get an ebook version because we don't have to put it on paper.
yeah,
And then suddenly everybody's addicted to that model, and now libraries are dying as a result. Dying.
yeah.
Mhm.
I want to come back to something Chris had mentioned that's really apropos and it continually like sticks in my head, which is the empires when they run out of growth or anything more to capture is when they die. And LLMs and the AI companies have completely run out of English language sources that they can access, and they're all complaining about it, or many of them are complaining about it. OpenAI is drastically complaining about it. And the AI models for the rest, the US based AI models for the rest of the world are really not useful.
Mhm.
They don't really work well in any other language because it's all based on English and it just is useless elsewhere.
Right.
But essentially the fuel for their models, they've hit peak. They have hit the end for the most part. There is no good actual sources. Everything has been consumed. They've gone through all the blogs. They've gone through all the everything.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's just, they've kind of hit a point where it's just like, okay, getting more information in isn't making our models any better.
Mhm.
Anthropic's been, Anthropic and quite a few of the Chinese models have been either focusing on efficiency, being able to do fact checking, owning the models, essentially taking larger models, being able to break them down so they're smaller, more targeted models that are far more helpful. And that is a really good approach, but that doesn't fit the scenario for going out and raising billions and trillions for the future and building large data centers because they're not needed for those models. And Apple Apple with their last OS release had something sort of quietly released for unless you're a hardcore geek, which is in the 6.2 release, they enabled Thunderbolt 5 to essentially hook up different machines to use the GPUs with insanely low latency to give you just vast processing power. So
Mm.
Apple had sent out 4 Apple Studios with 2 terabytes of GPU to developers and people that have been playing around with local LLMs and said, just play with them. And it's like $40,000 to $50,000 of hardware. Using using the 2.5 with the new technology, use the Thunderbolt 5, using MLX models that have been honed for MLX, which is Apple's rendering engine, and it is just blowing the doors off anything like price per dollar, anything that NVIDIA can do.
Mm.
And it's just at lower energy usage, and most of the models that are helpful for mid-sized companies of 5,000 and smaller, that's a really good thing to have and run locally. You don't need to use a large LLM.
Mhm.
And for $50,000, you've got something that can outpace, what you're paying to, Anthropic or others, and
Yeah.
is targeted on your own information that doesn't go outside the firewall, and you don't need a large data center.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's
Well,
just,
and it does seem like that will be, that type of use inside of,
Mhm.
excuse me, a company's own firewall, right, will be something that, that could displace CRMs or that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And, but, so to go back to the empire metaphor, right?
yeah.
Really, we're not talking about the, we're not talking about the Napoleonic, and we're not really even talking about the Soviet, empire.
Yeah,
We're talking about the British Empire. We're talking about a mercantilist, kind
yeah,
of an endeavor where what they wanted to do was be the technology center that would take natural resources from all of these far-flung regions and, and process them in the center and then send them back out to these people who now had to be consumers of these,
yeah.
kind of manufacturers, and so they, kind of famously, destroyed India and stopped them from being, the second, probably possibly the biggest,
Mm,
textile manufacturing powerhouse in the world, you know,
mm,
right up there with China with silk, so cotton in India, silk in China, throughout all of history. And then, kind of the British
mm,
Empire goes in there and destroys that and makes them a producer of raw cotton that can be shipped to the mills in,
mm.
back in the center in the metropolis. So what's the analogy then? Yeah, I agree that the initial natural resource, right, the raw cotton or the timber, right, for the mills was all of this English language data that was absorbed. Um, now it starts to become, and I guess the thing that I've been wondering about actually for I'm really the better part of the last year is, what happens as, as sort of that initial, kind of, um, crawl the web, opportunity dries up, and now you've got these increasingly kind of proprietary databases, right? Tweets, for X, or, Facebook posts for Meta, or, or I hate to say it, all of those Google books that were supposed to be in the public domain forever for Google, that's going to produce, the output that kind of comes out of that is going to look different, right? So the truth that these truth-seeking, machines try to converge on is actually going to diverge, I think, rather than converge.
Well, there's not only the raw data that they're mining or the language or the stuff they're consuming to be able to put the material back out, but there's also the kind of the low wage slavery that they're using from third world countries. As I think it was in
Mhm.
chapter 18,
Yeah.
she used the phrase colonialist logic
Mhm.
when she was talking about paying these researchers the $25 an hour that they would otherwise get in Germany as a
Right.
we're trying to help you out and pay you kind of what you're worth. But she wrote colonialist logic, and I in the margin I wrote and capitalistic,
Mhm.
which is the other piece. So it's not just the empire idea, but there's this sense of capitalism that also underlies that
Well, yeah, that's the
colonialist.
thing is globalist capitalism is colonialism without the state at the,
Yeah.
at the
Because
top.
it's
Mhm.
and it's bound up, and if you think historically, Adam Smith was writing roughly at the same time the empire was going out and becoming empire.
Mhm.
We're traveling and going to these other places, and how do we leverage and make how do we make money off of that? How do
Right.
we create wealth and growth and capital, and just totally ignore the rights and sense of humanity of the people that we're going in and taking over.
What are we going to get out of Venezuela? What's the draw there? I mean, it's got to be the oil.
Yeah,
It,
or presumably,
it, so
presumably
the
that's what it is. But how does Trump and his family take that value for themselves by going in and doing that? Who, you know,
yeah, the only
cui
piece of the
bono?
oil, the only piece of the oil that makes sense is that a chunk of that oil was going to China, and it was essentially the administration like poking China by blocking the oil.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm like,
It's got to throw them more into the arms of Russia.
yeah, and I don't. With like this morning's news, I keep on thinking that China was talking to Russia and Russia talking to the administration saying, hey, go after Venezuela because that will make problems with China. China is going, hey, if they go after Venezuela, Taiwan is ours.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, the administration thinking, ooh, Russia's giving us great, intelligence to go after, this will really peeve
Mm-hmm.
China, not getting the whole picture.
Yeah.
And just going, ooh, we're playing checkers with only one color on the board. We've won.
We're playing one-dimensional chess.
Yep.
So yeah, it's well, and it does strike me that there's nobody in American politics probably that's stupider and more venal than Cubans in Miami.
Yeah.
Than those Cuban nationalists, who have been, behind everything from the Bay of Pigs onward, and who are driving, our Secretary of State, who's also our national security advisor.
Yes.
He's wearing a lot of hats.
And he runs the slushy machine.
He's such a wily coyote super genius himself.
How is it that they seem to have such a loud voice and so much power in the broader sense of things? I mean, it's literally,
It-
and it even goes back because we haven't had our, Tim's going to be watching the video later and be like, where the hell's our
That's
West
a
Wing
West Wing reference, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's, there's, and like a month ago, I was watching those episodes about, Leo McGarry going to Cuba and that kind of power and how Cubans in Florida who are Americans and have a vote can like drive an agenda.
Mhm.
A large chunk of it is they work really well as a base, and without that base, you do not win.
Well, and
in
Florida,
politics, and I'm like,
yeah, and
in Miami, they're large enough at a state level that they can essentially drive things.
Yeah.
In southern Florida, they really drive things. And I'm like, you've got to appease the Cubans. And I'm like, so they just, they just kept on going, oh, you're giving us this, we'll take another step.
Right. They drive
Let's
Florida
see what else we
politics,
can
they
get.
drive electoral politics.
Yep.
They're close to Palm Beach, they're close to Mar-a-Lago, right?
Yeah.
They're well placed. It does seem kind of funny, that it's like which little power center is going to have is going to have the ear of the people who are ultimately going to make this decision. And if it had been Texas oilmen, it might have been a completely different.
But you look at that microcosm of Cubans in Florida, and you have similar setups of Puerto Ricanos in New York who probably should have way more power if they were whatever that model is the Cubans have done in Florida. I'm surprised it's not being done by 10 other marginalized groups all over the rest of the country.
Yeah.
But Puerto Rico wasn't tied to an adversarial nuclear power.
Yeah, that
had they gotten nukes
Pigs is
inside
definitely
of
a big
else.
hinge on which a lot of this turns.
Yeah, and there's a funny piece when, like during the Obama administration, they started getting more friendly with Cuba and opening things up, and that made the Republicans nervous because that was their power piece. Like, you don't want to give up something that drives fear in the electorate.
Right.
And if you can have something that drives fear in the electorate and always continually use it, then, that is good. But if you lose that power piece, and with opening up relations to Cuba, that was taking away the power piece. And like as soon as Trump came back in, we're no longer friendly with Cuba.
Right. Well, and that
the
was the
power piece
weirdest.
back.
That was the craziest thing, right? Because the Cold War ended in 1990, and it
Yep.
took till 18 years till Obama in 2008 that we realized that that Cuba is not necessarily our Cold War adversary anymore. And
Yep.
incidentally, they've just been through their special period, and
Yep.
and had actually kind of emerged, not entirely unscathed, but arguably stronger in some ways from it. And so which must have but there are some mysteries that are just, I think, always going to be mysteries. Like, why always Haiti as well, right? I mean, Haiti's no threat to us at all, but why do we have this? Americans have
because those slaves revolted and caused problems 300 years ago.
300 years ago,
and somebody's still paying that off.
Yeah. Well, and they're still paying reparations for getting their independence 300 years ago.
Isn't that the French?
Well, the French, they're paying the French. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the French are an important ally, right? I mean,
and if we can figure out how to get money out of him, sure we.
The president of France can come to America and ask the president of the United States to have Charlie Kirk call Candace Owens and say, "Stop talking about my wife." That's a weird relationship.
No, France has been sidelined now because it's grown in importance because now Clooney is a citizen, but it's also now been sidelined because Trump thinks Clooney's a loon. So if you're, as a country, you're going to give citizenship to George Clooney, well, screw you now. Like,
is that really just a preemptive first strike on Clooney's part against the California billionaire tax?
I don't know.
No, it can't be because Depardieu went to Russia.
More of Clooney's holdings are actually in Italy, I think.
Yeah.
Than anywhere else. And it actually hinged, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. He changed agencies in part because of some chicanery relating to Italian holdings. So,
Our man in Hollywood.
Yeah. Hollywood Babylon. Yeah. It's just the perfect fuel for conspiracy theorizing.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's a book that I read in college, David Halberstam's Powers That Be, and read it for fun over a summer. And it looked at politics, policy, and press, and World War II up through Nixon era. And it was really, really good. It shaped an insane amount of how I saw things. And it touched on Cuba a little bit. And it sort of gave, and Nixon was very much understood that fear piece. And a lot of his, you've got to use fear to get into office, make the people, if they fear something, you want to be the protector.
Yep.
And I'm like always looking for that. And I'm like, the Republican Party still, what's left of it, or what it is even turned into, is all based on that. Like manufacturing things to fear out of conspiracy,
right,
and finding our protector.
Right.
And so
Chicago 1968 really made Nixon.
Yeah. And then there's Sam, who is just like, I'm leading you, from all these bad things that other AI companies are going to do, and I will be the first to lead us to AGI.
Well, that seems to be a recurring thing too, because Trump totally has run on this. I'm your protector.
Yep.
Like, I, the non-Christian, am the protector of the Christian nation.
Right.
Yeah.
And somehow
also the only one. I'm the only one who can solve any problem that might, that I might manufacture. Right?
Yeah. And I can solve it by just saying something randomly that, like, I'm going to get us out of all these wars instantaneously, and yet here we are
Day one, guaranteed.
Here we are.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It's weird that, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of. I've been watching the news incessantly. I've been trying to do other things the last couple of days, and
Could be healthy.
and well, get a little healthy, and organize my my work and my life and all of that. So I've had little time for this, but I haven't heard a lot of feedback about I haven't heard any pushback on this overnight invasion of Venezuela and removal of apparent removal of the of Maduro and his wife, which I suppose does make way for the Nobel Peace Prize winner to bring peace to Venezuela.
It's only the couple and not the rest of the administration. I mean, I think it's a much steeper climb than that.
Oh, okay. So you think the regime has not been changed?
Correct.
You also have to remember,
we don't like regime change, remember, except when it happens for us.
The U.S. does not have a long, storied history of doing really great things in South America.
Exactly.
In a general sense. So
no, we totally don't. Yeah.
It's going to be. No. I'm honestly.
We don't think of the second move. We think of the first.
You're forgetting, Dan. The whole Venezuela thing is just to distract people from all the Epstein. Business. So
there's a lot of foreign countries have all piped up and said, hey, this is really not a good thing. And then there's been a handful of Republicans who are just like, where was the authorization for this? We haven't been saying no, never do this.
But it's a law enforcement action, Thomas. It's not a
right. It's
executed by the military.
Weapons charges
apparently now a weapon of mass destruction.
Well, they needed to pick him up for drug and weapons charges in New York.
Narco-terrorism, yeah.
Well, if you think about it too, he just pardoned a narco baron to the tune of a couple billion even 2 months ago. So
was that guy in Honduras or
yes.
Guatemala?
Yeah, the largest
but that's different.
coke distributor.
Well, we have a long and storied, career in Honduras too.
We should, I'm surprised we haven't done the office grid and taken bets on, when he disappears this year, because my guess is within the next 4 months, his frontotemporal dementia is going to get the better of him, and I don't think Trump lives through 2026.
Really? Well,
health-wise, I don't think he's going to make it through this year.
Wow.
He's not. And then the question is, what happens with
President Vance do?
President Vance and his regime. And most of the Republican Party is not super happy with Vance in a general sense.
Right.
And he's gonna, because he's even weirder, because he's super Catholic, the Southern Christian Baptists just are not gonna, take to him at all.
He'll make Erica Kirk his vice president. That'll appease them.
The Catholic Church isn't happy with him because he's new to the Catholic Church and doesn't seem to understand the things about Catholic Church.
He killed the last pope.
Christianity. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. But that made way for Pope Bob. Bob of Chicago.
Bob from Chicago. Yep.
Yeah. My folks actually call him Pope Bob just for kicks. Yeah,
we're so far off topic now.
We are, but it's kind of funny because I've been. I mean, it's been 2 weeks, and I've been in New England, and and then I kind of came back here, and I've been thinking about my my year and sort of planning things out. And Eric, you're about to go, right? So Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And so next week, before you go, shall we just decide on how much we want to read of the new book?
We're sticking with Pinker?
Shall we think? I mean, I think we should.
Yeah. I wasn't bad mouthing him. I just Pinker to me is
it's
Pinker.
I'm reading it with an eye.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It goes. I mean, it's short, so maybe we should read. Let's see,
50%.
Yeah, maybe 50% would be to the end of. Well, if we went to the end of chapter 4, that'd be about 150 pages.
Might be a stretch.
Yeah, you think? Okay. 100 pages would be the end of chapter 3. So we read the first 3 chapters?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do it in 3 weeks then, probably.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. All right, good.
Happy New Year, all.
Happy New Year. See you.
Happy New Year.
So yeah, I've been running. I went to. I had this cold while I was out there, so but I still got a lot. I still did a lot. God, we were walking. My daughter took me to the ballet to see the Nutcracker because that was her big thing when she was, when she was young and wanted to be a ballerina and stuff. She was in the Nutcracker a couple times. And so we went to see the Nutcracker in Boston, and walking to it, we walked by the Brattle Street bookshop, which I just thought, oh my God. And I stopped, and they had the outdoor, they have that little vacant lot next door with the outdoor shelves and stuff. And I looked at the shelves momentarily, and I just thought, oh God, I could go in and spend hours.
Hmm.
And so I've gotten more interested in actually visiting bookstores, and so I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to going places and visiting their bookstores in the
Cool.
in the coming year, and getting, and sort of filling my shelves with old hardcover, stuff that I can consider to be at least partially, primary source material.
I got the T-shirt on for my favorite local indie bookstore,
Yeah, I noticed that.
Politics and Prose.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's cool. That's cool.
don't-
It is. It's true. Yes. So many.
It was their 40th anniversary
Wow.
T-shirt. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I went by.
And
I actually went over in between Minneapolis and St. Paul. There's a place called Midway Books, which is, I thought was just kind of comics and some used books, but it's 3 stories of
Oh, cool.
of used. It has no new books, but it actually has some rare books, and yeah, it was fun just kind of poking around in there.
It's been a weird thing, but in the last 2 years, there have been 3 little indie bookstores that have popped up within 2 miles of my house
Cool.
in Altadena, California, or Pasadena.
Mhm.
One is Octavia's Bookshelf, which is a very niche, like African American owned bookstore that kind of caters to a very specific niche of books.
Is it
And I
related to
maybe
Octavia
have
Butler?
They've got maybe 800 square feet, so it's very small.
Mhm.
And then there's a little community next to us in Sierra Madre that uh, it's like 80% used books and 20% new books
Mhm.
has popped up. And then there's another one that's like a boba tea shop that has, I don't know, maybe 1,000 titles,
Mhm.
and it tends to be indigenous writing, other writing, kind of LGBTQ a little bit. But that's been kind of interesting to see, like, these 3 little things pop up
Mhm.
in the last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, actually, one of the things I went looking for, if I made it here, is it's right over here. Old science fiction. I thought I gotta find some old science fiction, so I found this.
Huh.
And I used to love. I mean, he's so pulpy.
I can read his title, so obviously he is a big writer at that point. But what was the title of that book?
The weapon. His name was made The Weapon Shops of Isher. He
Yeah.
wrote, and it's apparently Van Vogt was known for a style of science fiction novel writing that was called the fix-up. And so, so basically what he would do is he would take a bunch of things that he had published serially in someplace like Astounding or Analog or whatever, and put these short stories together into, kind of build some connective tissue and put these things together into kind of a novel form. And so he's got this one, and he's got another one about the weapon makers. I think that's called The Weapon Makers. And that was a kind of a world of his. Then he has a bunch of books in a series called Null A, which is a non-Aristotelian, because he was a devotee of what's his name, Count Korbisky, the general semantics guy. And apparently he was also briefly not a Scientologist, but a Dianetics enthusiast. So pre-Scientology. And these guys just fascinate me. And this is not, it's not good writing, but it's
Yeah.
it kind of carries you along, and
Fun little pastiche.
yeah. And it's it sort of does, it actually reminds me that there was a whole world of
Well,
science fiction.
so where does that stand in the spectrum of scrolling Instagram and reading Plato and Aristotle and the great books?
Well, this is actually the mindless, kind of recreation that
scrolling in the 50s.
replaces doom scrolling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I avoid doom scrolling, and I occasionally allow myself to crack one of these. And it took me, and I read for like an hour. I read like the first 74 pages of this 10 chapters. This thing, it goes pretty quickly, but it does seem like these guys were I don't know, it interests me because of that era, that sort of age in the in the late 40s and through the 50s and into the early 60s of kind of sort of pulp science fiction and this American technological empire that we're beginning to build, and this sort of and other people, not only Van Vogt, but people like Heinlein, and
So here's the question then, is how do you as a historian translate the idea of the fix-up from science fiction into American history for your students? How do you fix it up?
Well, and it was actually, I was thinking about that when we were earlier when we were talking about kind of um, when we were first talking about the Venezuela thing. I was thinking, well, I mean, I'm not teaching modern America. I'm teaching teaching U.S. History 1 this coming semester. So I'll get to use all my primary sources, and that's why I've been kind of pushing to get these primary source anthologies done, is because I am sort of dusting off all of those sources and adding some new ones and all that. But yeah, when I prepare to teach US 2 again, I mean, I always spend some time talking excuse me, from Haiti through the Monroe Doctrine, through the Banana Republics, through, sort of Che Guevara, witnessing the successful, kind of land reform revolution in Bolivia, but then moving on, after that in 1952, but then moving on to Guatemala, where the U.S. comes in and crushes that that land reform action, and he's put on an enemies list, so he flees to Mexico and meets the Castro brothers, and the rest is history. But that whole kind of Banana Republic era in Latin America, and really, it does begin kind of in Haiti, and then it kind of goes through the Monroe Doctrine, and then then Bolivar's revolutions, and his dream of either a United States of South America, or alternatively, at least a common market and a trade agreement, in the Congress of the Americas in 1826, which I've read different accounts of. Right? There's one argument that says that John Quincy Adams wanted to send delegates, but he was sort of blocked by the Southerners, right? Because of course the first thing that all of the Latin Americans did when they got their independence was they abolished slavery. So we can't be consorting with those types. So yeah, so I do think that is an opportunity kind of for a fix up that that sort of kind of pins all of those together and draws some connective lines between them. And now you know the rest of this. Yeah.
You remember him? Paul
No,
Harvey?
I don't. I don't
He
know.
used to do, I think it was like ABC. I remember hearing him on long cross-country drives. We'd listen to like Casey Kasem and the Countdown, but you'd
Mhm.
also hear like weird little radio stories where Paul Harvey would take some famous figure and tell some story about when they were young or starting out that
Mm.
you had never heard.
Right.
And and as he was reading the story, he literally would read off like he would go from the first page and he like, okay, page two, and then he would continue on. And then at the end, he would say, this is who it was, and you know the rest of the story.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
that's the rest of the, and you know the rest of the story.
Okay. So the making of the person.
He was like a Cronkite era radio news guy.
Mhm.
It, it sort of sounds like it would also fit in with Princess Bride as well, with Peter Falk's narration. And also reading, I read My Son Travels with Charlie
Mhm.
when he was a kid. And I realized that the patterns that Steinbeck wrote was very close to Walter Cronkite's delivery.
Mm.
And I would start drifting into like a Walter Cronkite sort of imitation as I was reading along. I'm like, holy crud, this I've never noticed this before.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of funny because I mean, when I got it kind of academically involved with history, my master's degree was in Latin American, and so
Hmm.
I did read a lot about, kind of the colonial. I mean, and actually, it's kind of weird because the field of Latin American history is really kind of divided between, colonial and post-colonial eras, right? And people specialize to a much greater degree than they do in U.S. history. Partially because the colonial era was as long as it was. So there's centuries of material to kind of go through in that. But the idea that yeah, that there was something going on, and that America was somehow implicated. I mean, I remember getting very worked up because this was in like the early 2000s. I got my master's in 2006, and I was already, it had only been, a few years since the water war in Cochabamba, in
Hmm.
2000, 2001, right? So I wrote, I wrote a novel that I never tried to put out there because it was way too violent. I kind of wrote a revenge novel of the South Americans kind of going after the globalists. But yeah, that always struck me as, as just something that um, should be more accessible, and it should be easier for kind of regular American people to identify,
Mhm.
right? And to kind of sympathize and empathize with these people on the other end of these actions that the American empire takes.
Mhm.
Excuse me, and it's a mystery to me, how we've managed, how the people, undertaking these wars and, police actions or whatever they want to call them, have managed to, I mean, I guess in the same way that they've managed to, sort of divide, American working people, by race or ethnicity or,
Well,
well,
at
any other identity,
at the same time, you have that, the, uh, I forget the guy's name, but he created the phrase weird Western,
oh, weird, yeah, yeah.
industrialized, educated.
Mhm,
But the family unit has become smaller and smaller and smaller over the last six generations. So
mhm,
you've gone from, like Tammany Hall politics, where it was all about tribe and clan, and it's now down to the individual, and you try to reach people maybe through things like churches as a
mhm,
means of, and I read a statistic, it's way cheaper. I think it was an Axios thing. They were summarizing some political data. It costs 45 cents to reach someone in a church for political, pressure
Mhm.
versus a buck and a half or more to reach an individual who is religiously unaffiliated. So it's
Right.
way more expensive. So you can
Sure.
reach a whole bunch of people, but it's a problem as people become unchurched.
Yeah. Well, and there
It's
have been
harder
a
and
bunch of,
harder, more expensive to reach them through
yeah,
social media or other means that really has a heavy influence on them.
right. There have been a bunch of stories, not all of them, but some of them, kind of connected to the Charlie Kirk assassination of geofencing, right? Of sort of people kind of going in and and scraping all of this personal data off of out of people's devices who go into um,
Yeah.
these especially kind of evangelical kind of congregations
Well, that,
is the context in which I've been hearing. I've heard.
it's one of those things, and Trump has been better than others because he can have hot mic moments that no one will seem to care about tomorrow because there's a new story of the day every day, and he's the main character all the time.
Right.
But it's a whole lot easier through social media to geofence people out of I can say, to Sam Altman, everyone, to bring it back to this, is I
Mhm.
can say one story to you and tell another story to Thomas, and I can both tell you both what you want to hear without the two of you communing and realizing, which I think is a kind of an interesting thing that we're going to have this common knowledge book of Pinkers after this
Yeah.
is it's not the story that I tell to Dan versus the story I tell to Thomas, but how do Thomas and Dan
Right.
know that they're on the same page
Right.
or not versus what I'm telling them
Right.
behind closed doors individually.
Yeah, and that may end up being very really interesting, especially to the extent. I mean, I've been listening to it. I haven't actually read the kind of read it and tried to highlight and parse out all of the
Yeah.
weird he knows that she knows that he knows that she knows that he knows that she knows kind of things. How many times do you have to say that before it becomes meaningless? And I was struck with that several times as I was listening, but that whole idea, that whole kind of Adlerian idea of coming to terms, right, is huge. And I'm also interested in, whether he's going to connect it to Gramsci, to
Yeah.
common sense.
Well, I was kind of struck you wrote about that this morning, the Niklas Luhmann two-page lecture that I found in his
Hmm.
manuscripts from
Yeah, from 68. Yeah.
1968.
Yeah.
And one of the important things, and I think he marked it as important in the lecture, where he used the word important, was don't excerpt other people's stuff. Like, don't quote them. Big, long quotes are useless. But if you're going to do it when they lay out a very specific definition.
Hmm.
And that's when you excerpt somebody,
Right.
is to encapsulate their definition precisely,
Hmm.
um, which I thought was kind of an interesting little snippet.
Yeah.
But it's hard unless you know about Zettelkasten and the whole, or have practiced it. It's hard to read that lecture, and it's really an outline for a lecture. I presume he spoke for an hour about it to
Right.
students
Sure.
at his university. And I have noticed too that just before at Munster was his first lecturing gig. So he's gotten his PhD
Hmm.
based on other stuff he wrote, not in a university setting. And they were like, oh, this work is interesting enough to get you your PhD.
Hmm.
So you can skip the PhD system. And
Right.
he's starting to teach when he gives this lecture. But before he's at Munster, he's at essentially another university about administrative, essentially
Hmm.
business college, essentially is what it was,
Yeah.
or how I read it. And so it's entirely about how do you run an office, run a business, run,
Hmm.
public administration,
Right.
aka how do you collect data? How
Well,
do
and
you
those are the
process it
techniques,
and
right,
run
that
it?
he's taking and translating into this academic work. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Well, I
Um,
thought that was, I thought that was interesting in that sense of, kind of coming to terms, which I also yesterday or the day before, I recorded another chapter of my, my handbook, and as a video, and put it out there. And it was the one where I had sort of forced myself to go back as I was rewriting it and deal with the syntopical reading section of Adler and Van Doren's book, which I don't think is in, excuse me, I probably mentioned a while back that I have got myself a 1940 copy of the Adler only How to Read a Book, and it's much different. And I don't think that, I think that, I mean, obviously there's 32 years between them. So Adler may have developed a lot of these ideas himself, but it does seem like the collaboration is the thing that sort of produces this much more kind of structured thing. And the idea that they developed this, magical sounding word, syntopical reading. And and it's the ultimate, and they call it, and they put it at the very end of the book, they call it the ultimate technique. And this is the, and this is the thing, and this is really where the meat of it is. And it's just 5 basic things that you're doing anyway, right? And
Well, but it's also something that a lot of people don't ever do, ever in their reading. And it's something we do regularly here, is kind of pick apart something, but then how does it relate to 7 other topics?
right, but it's the core of any
Even in our
research
discussion here, we've
Mhm.
talked about empire a couple of times and used examples from either other people's writing or, even Walter Isaacson's writing, and how does he treat this person versus that person? And not a lot of people get to that level of depth to do that kind of comparing and contrasting of disparate ideas from different spaces.
But anybody who writes a research paper kind of has to, right? You have to use more than one source, and so you have to be
Yeah.
able to, to kind of compare the sources, and you have to be able to kind of come to terms and understand if they're
Yeah.
using the terminology, in the same way. So those are, I mean,
But where have you seen that laid out specifically for a student to know it and do? Usually it's the kind of thing as a college student
right there, damn it.
you slowly figure this out over time and experience, rather than here's someone where they have laid out in the book, this is what you're supposed to be doing.
I agree,
And,
but
that piece
that's
is not, it's not as explicit
yeah,
in your, which is one of the things I find interesting about that Luhmann's 1968 little lecture, is here he is like explaining to students, presumably, and I presume it's a lecture he gave to students,
Mhm.
of this is how you do this work.
Yeah.
Here's how
Mhm.
I've done it here, and others have done it their own way or slightly different ways.
Mhm.
But this is how you do this work.
Yeah.
And without that tool of knowing how or seeing someone use it, and it's boring as hell. I mean, literally, when you I've been reading some of these indexing and filing manuals from
Yeah.
the mid-century,
Right.
and they're dull and dry as hell, but it's the being able to do that, and when I started as a young nobody in Hollywood, like, indexing and filing information and having it at your fingertips is paramount to like being able to do the job.
Sure.
And no one taught anyone how to you just throw a bunch of stuff into a bunch of files on a computer, and you
Mhm.
hope that through memory you might be able to find them again one
Right.
day based on what you named the file,
Right.
or what folder it's in, and then whether it was,
Well, and at the time, that was the unique value add, right? Was being that guy who had that kind of memory.
but I was
Mhm.
always that person. Like, everybody in an entire agency of 400 people
Sure.
would call me, hey, Chris, where do I find this thing?
Right.
And in large part, it was I have a really great natural memory
Mhm.
that I could say off the top of my head, it's this person in this place,
Right.
even in an early internet world where you could look some of this stuff up
Mhm.
online,
Mhm.
but people would call me and say, hey, what's this thing? Where do I find it?
Right.
Because I would know.
Yeah.
And I had no really great filing system to that point. It was all natural memory more than anything else.
Mhm. Well, yeah,
And so,
and that's the thing. And I think that gives you, not only it gives you a leg up, before you have a system, but it also is the impetus to, people like us to, to kind of improve on that natural ability with the system. I'm not disagreeing with you at all about the importance of it. I was just trying to demystify it a little bit,
Yeah.
for
Oh yeah, no,
students
and
who are,
that's the thing is students aren't taught this stuff or they're taught to do it for themselves. But in a business environment where you're changing jobs every 2 years, the first thing the person coming in needs to do is figure out how did you think about it and
Mhm.
how did you structure your filing system for that particular office or
Right.
your
Yeah.
email or whatever it is,
Mhm.
or the institutional knowledge. And 9 times out of 10, all the institutional knowledge was in your email account in the emails back and forth. And the first thing a company does is they wipe out the old person's email account
Right.
9 times out of 10, and here's your new email account under your name. So they've cleaned the slate entirely, and you're stuck with nothing.
Wiped out the
Like
institutional memory.
you, you don't have files and places to your filing cabinets to go to rely on. Like, oh, I could look this up potentially.
Mhm.
And even worse, in Lumon's case, he's got his numbering system that means something to him,
Mhm.
but nothing to anyone else.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so if you're trying to figure out how sociology works, like you've got to know, you got to have a master's level or better just to even start.
Yeah.
And then even once you're delving in, you're like, you don't know where you're going to find the thing.
Mhm.
And that's even when you know what the topic is, you can look it up in his index and then at least find a start.
Yeah.
You're still half lost.
Right. Right. Well, and the arbitrariness of the way that he accumulated that, and
Yeah.
that whole you must put this card behind another card, and it must
Yeah.
connect, in some sort of way, is a really interesting exercise. And I was, I remain, sort of ambivalent, kind of about that whole thing. I think that it's an interesting exercise, but it's a huge investment,
Mhm.
time and effort, and I'm not sure that it really pays for itself. I mean, if you have, I mean, especially nowadays when we have all of these, systems that have, bidirectional linking and transclusion and stuff.
Well, but that's the thing though, and you said it this morning, with my hypothesis collection, stuff's a whole lot easier if you tag it for finding it and reusing it later on.
Absolutely. Yep.
And, that's the thing. And invariably, I watched there's a Reddit sub for commonplace books.
Mhm.
And literally 3 times a week, somebody shows up asking the question, like, how do I arrange this? Like, I'm putting things into this notebook, but like, how
Mhm.
am I supposed to find it again?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
literally, they're asking the basic question, how
Yep.
do I index this so I can search it and use it and make it valuable in the long term?
Right.
And a lot of people lately, it's been like a fad, like, oh, you pick 10 topics.
Can you read
I
it?
can't read that. It's
Oh,
too
sorry. It
large on
says
my
it
end.
says in inhalt content contentu.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so at the beginning of each of these books is like, a
So
couple of
this is
pages
your
of index that are available to you to kind of.
So can I guess that that's your new Leutram 1917 notebook?
That's my new one. Yeah, that's my new one for 2026. Yep.
See that's how bad it is. You can say read out what the heading is on a notebook page, and I know who manufactured it.
Absolutely. Well, that was a gimme, like, but
Um,
but yeah, I got that and a calendar on my desktop.
but that's the weird thing is a lot of people it's become popular in social media like, oh, you pick like 5 or 10 topics and 10 colors, and
Mhm.
then you color code everything, and it's like, yeah, but what do you do 3 years from now when your interests change and you go outside of those 10 topics you thought were going to be the ten
Mhm.
topics,
Mhm.
and now you've got 11th or a 15th or a 77th? Like you're screwed because your color palette for buying markers somewhere is just
Yep.
shot to hell.
Well, you gotta do something additional, right? You gotta
I
highlight those
know.
colors in different colors, right? Well, and the digital equivalent to that is, if you make a map of content, right, and then all of a sudden, you have a new category of interest, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got, I mean, then I've done that. It was really time consuming, to actually kind of go through an MOC and, and sort of rejigger it so that, so that some of these things, fit in.
Even worse than that is, and it's on the kind of ties into the idea of coming to terms with something, is as you look as or at least as I have looked back in intellectual history, there is an idea that I call combinatorial complexity.
Mhm.
And you've got a whole bunch of disparate ideas, and what happens when you take them and you put them together, and that creates a third idea, something brand new that presumably no one's ever thought of before, but that's not always the case. And when you thrash around through history, you usually find somebody's had this idea before, but they called it something else. And
Mhm.
so
That's
across
interesting.
time,
Yep. Yep.
there are words in Latin, there are
Yep.
words in English, Old English, that talk, there are different people who've talked about this idea of what I call combinatorial complexity.
Mhm.
They gave it a different name.
Right. Right.
But what are
Mhm.
those names,
Right.
and how do you follow that idea
Mhm.
from 4,000 years ago to now?
Right.
And there are people now who, like, when I describe to you what that is, you have no word for what that is at all. But how do you come to terms with old authors who gave, or in some people, they'll talk about it and
Who
it's a
called
whole
it who
sentence,
called it a dialectic or
you
who,
know.
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh, and dialectic only kind of impinges on it, but doesn't
Right.
actually
Right,
describe the
it's adjacent.
thing.
It's adjacent to that. Right. Also, yeah, this week I was listening to while I was doing something, I was listening to a long podcast. I think it was Brett and Heather, and they were talking about how every dyad is actually a triad, right? Because it's thing A, thing B, and then the relationship between thing A and thing B, which
Yeah.
is its own thing, right? And so that's where the thing that you're talking about lives, Chris, right? It's in those combinations that then need to be sort of named, or comparisons, right? Or contrasts that need to be named and understood as relationships.
But I find it's totally bizarre that even in the note-taking space, we're linking ideas together, and there is no name other than saying linking ideas together. Or people will talk about, I've seen the phrase the magic of note-taking, by which a lot of people usually mean the creativity that comes out of, I've got these couple of notes that I've linked together, and that then has led me to this other totally new idea or new concept.
Mhm.
And that's the magic of doing it. That's why I do it, is because there's this creativity piece,
Mhm.
but there's no real good concrete name for what that is
Yeah.
or why. And usually you don't even know it's there unless you've experienced it a couple
Well,
times.
it's a kind of
And even when
emergence.
you've
Could you call it
experienced it,
emergence?
and that emergence is a piece of it, but it's not a thing that's out there in the zeitgeist for this is why we do this.
Mhm. I'm going to call it
Except unless
combinatorial
you've done
complexity / emergence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unless you've done it a
And you're
while and then you know it. But I've been collecting variations, and
Mhm.
usually it's not just even one or two. My phrase for it is two words. I'd love to come down to one word that just gets the whole thing. I need to come up with a word like consilience
Or
that
you need to
just,
make up a word like
you
syntopical.
know, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then you got to popularize it so that it's a thing and
And you got
people
to write a
understand.
Malcolm Gladwell book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. I'm getting there slowly.
All right.
I feel like I need like six more examples of this thing. I've got a couple good examples from Raymond Lull
Yep.
from the 11th century
Perfect.
who's done this before,
Yep.
but
I think that'll be that
yeah, there's
that would be really interesting as as a kind of a set of, as a concept, and then a set of examples of,
yeah.
where it's been implemented. I think that would be an ideal, concept.
But
there's a
and
I mean,
it's got to
what it
be
reminds it
something
reminds me
that's
a little bit of James Burke. Remember
yeah, there you
Connections?
go. Yep.
yeah, yeah,
And
the long
he's
transfer
a good
narrative.
example from the 70s on
Yeah.
BBC.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, he's one of the
In
ones I think a year ago I put him on my list of Although I think I've only ever watched the first episode of his Connection series from the
Hmm.
70s.
Yeah, I think I watched it
And
on.
I don't know, I think I looked for and tried to find the reboot of it a couple years back, but I don't think anybody was streaming at the time.
I think I
It's
saw
on
one a
Internet
single
Archive.
episode on Amazon Prime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Um,
Thomas. What was that?
Internet Archive has a good chunk of it.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yeah. Um, the information science academics have an awful lot of work on what you're looking at, Chris,
Yeah.
and an awful lot of terms. Because when folksonomy was going on, one of the things that was central to using it within organizations was essentially one of the nice things about it is you can point to an object and you capture all the different terms for, and you're capturing identity, and each identity you can then tie back to what's their domain, what's their understanding. So you can see, oh, the engineers call it this, the marketing people call it this, the information scientists call it this, and you're able to track back all those different variations. And you can start doing, and then you can also watch an object and term through time and watch the lexicographical drift as the terms change and people start code switching and using other domains terms.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of fun. And then like around 2012 to 15, it sort of fell out, all of that work. And it's still taught in information science grad schools, but there's not as many kids picking it up or students picking it up. But it's
Yeah.
just watching that, and language shifts with terminology far more rapidly than people consider.
Yeah.
I was talking to people in sciences, and they were spending, for a professional organization, I think it was psychologists, they were spending around $300,000 to $800,000 every 2 to 3 years to update their taxonomy, and it was shifting 30 to roughly 40% each time they did it,
Wow.
with new terms or terms falling out.
Mm-hmm.
And Nature Publishing, they had an R&D group that had built their own social bookmarking tool called Conatia, and they were finding terms with cross domains,
Mm.
and they were essentially getting new terms and new uses for free rather than spending. Their taxonomy updates were in the seven figures every 3 years or so, and this was just eating massive chunks out of that budget. And they're like, all we really need is like one or two people introducing a new term, and then having digital librarian go through and go, yeah, this is valid, this is not valid, or let's put this in the watch list. And I was like, oh, this is really good. Where did you guys pick this up? And they're like, we learned it from you. And I'm like, oh,
cool. Well, that's perfect. That's perfect. So the circle closes, right?
Or you even have
that.
gaps where like, oh, note taking on index cards was a thing a century ago and it's not anymore. And then all these new kids come in with their digital tools and they create a whole new set of, like the word ideaverse is just such a, yes, it's a concept, it's an idea, but like, we need that word to do the work we're doing, or do we need the word Zettelkasten as a brand new word, a loan word from German to describe a thing we already had? Like,
Well, it's interesting though, because in the sciences, especially, I mean, if Kuhn is, to whatever extent Kuhn is right, then every new paradigm kind of rewrites history, right? Because you never read the history of the science of the old paradigm, right? Unless you're a historian of science, right? All the new science students learn the science based on the new paradigm. So then they've got a whole new set of either terminology or connotations and definitions of words that mean things that they didn't used to mean before. So it's not only from from phlogistical to elemental oxygen, right?
I just reread, maybe once a decade I've been reading it, but I just in the last couple months I reread Erwin Schrödinger's What is Life? See that series of lectures and then the series of lectures he did after called Mind and Matter that usually are collected into a single volume. and he has a section on describing consciousness, and it's not his definition of what it is dramatically different than what we colloquially think of it as.
Sure.
And it took a few minutes to figure out he's not talking about the same thing I'm thinking about.
Right.
And how do I reframe to know what the hell he's talking about, and or tie it to, what that space looks like now,
Right.
75 years plus later.
Right. What Sam Harrison's wife thinks it means.
You know.
Yeah. But
Or
it's
what-
kind of one of the things that really does fascinate me is sort of that area of ideas leaving their domain and and sort of becoming part of a zeitgeist or a
Yeah,
bigger
yeah.
kind of cultural space.
Mhm.
And excuse me, and my question is always, is it still legitimate, right? Does it retain its, it's not only predictive powers, but just metaphorical strength, when applied in this new setting.
So-
Yeah.
A lot of times I
One
think
of-
that's less true than we think it is.
Yeah, one of the things, having lived through it, of just with folksonomy, like folksonomy was, I put it out, I threw the term out to get information architects that love to talk about what something is called
Mhm.
to stop figuring out what something is called and start talking about what is actually going on. And the term sort of stuck.
Mm.
I'm like, oh, the social bookmarking thing with Delicious and other things like it are essentially regular folks using, building their own taxonomy. So it's a folksonomy.
Mhm.
It is not something that is given to them, but it's, an explicit, their explicit terms and vocabulary applied to an object.
Mhm.
And as it grew out of information architects and information science space, it got insanely fuzzy as to what it was and just lost a lot of meaning.
Mhm.
And then as it sort of drifted out of popularity, it came back to sort of more or less its original intent.
So there was a folksonomy involved in redefining the term.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it was like
Well-
people were saying Wikipedia is a folksonomy. I'm like, no, nope, not it, not it.
Right.
And
Yeah, so how
just-
proprietary did you feel as the owner of the original
so
definition?
it bugged me, but I also knew there wasn't anything I could do about it. And people were like, why don't you copyright it or, put a trademark on it? I'm like, it is valuable to be used, and putting, a restriction on it means that it won't be used. And
Decrease.
it is a good separation for, it's not this thing, it's this other stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so it was really helpful. And, the thing that pleased me was having it go into Oxford English Dictionary, and they got it right.
Mm.
What the definition was. I'm like, okay,
Well,
have
but
it.
that's because they're going to try and find variations of that
Yeah.
thing to be
Yeah.
able to define it and define the shift over time. So I'm actually working on trying to push Zettelkasten as an English word into the OED because it doesn't exist. And so I've
Huh.
literally done some of the work to find early examples of the word Zettelkasten as a German word being used in English. And I've gotten some versions from the I think 20s and 30s,
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
as well as newer versions of it becoming repopularized with the other Kuhn, who was writing about note taking in the 2007 blogosphere.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My favorite folksonomy is having watched my daughter grow up, and I used to write down neologisms she would come up with. And one of my favorites was we were walking around one day and she used the phrase walking river.
Ooh.
And I was like, what? Like, it took me a minute of thinking to figure out that she didn't have the word sidewalk. So she made up
Ah.
the phrase, this is the river on which we're walking. So it's a
Cool.
walking river.
Cool.
And then she didn't have the word for hoodie or a jacket with a hood on it, so she would always call hers her hat coat.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it was like,
Yeah.
so those kind of spontaneous neologisms that you only see in little kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't see, like, to me, Walking River was such a sophisticated, like,
Yeah.
mashup of words that, like, totally encapsulated the thing she meant.
Yeah.
Like, that just was, to me, those were awesome.
Sure. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. One of
Yeah.
the things I'm curious about, specifically with, excuse me, respecting Zettelkasten, is we just sort of assume that that is the default word in German, even because it's the one that we've taken
Mhm.
along
Yeah, yeah.
on, right? Are there other terms that had equivalent
I have not heard of
currency?
any, but if you go to German Amazon, let's say, and you search for Zettelkasten, what you will find are typically you'll find them for sale. There are boxes for holding post-it notes.
Oh, okay.
And that's in on Amazon in Germany that you search for that word and that's what you find. And that's what, so the modern definition of Zettelkasten would be post-it note holder,
Hmm.
essentially.
Okay.
But in English, I think Zettelkasten in the note-taking space took hold in America from 2013 on and really big time in like 2018, 2019,
Yeah.
because we had lost the English word card index.
Hmm.
And even when it was used in America, card index was a broader catch-all for all kinds of other things.
Yeah.
And because the word in German was so foreign to us, and it meant slip box in a note-taking sense to Luhmann, that
Yeah.
it was a lot easier to take this foreign word to mean a very specific type of thing and action
Hmm.
versus a card index could be anything from a filing cabinet to a Rolodex to
Sure.
a,
Sure.
you
So that
know,
makes it special, and
a
it's a cool word.
library card
Yeah.
catalog,
It's a cool word.
whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, a Rolodex is a very specific, super narrow word that means one and only one type of card index.
Right.
Or a library card catalog is a card index for a super niche use case.
Right.
And so it makes a whole lot more sense. And it's easier to subsume Zettelkasten to mean, oh, note taking on index cards
Right. Right.
versus card index, which was a thing.
Right. Well, and it's current enough in German that, when Sonke Ahrens, had his book translated into German, the title was Die Zettelkastenprinzip.
Yeah.
So, I guess that
Hmm.
did the job. It,
Yeah.
it communicated what it needed to.
Oh, there was because he did it too, and I didn't write down the actual German for it. Um, God, where was it? He did have Luhmann used the phrase principle of arbitrariness in that lecture,
Hmm.
or at least that's how I translated it. And I'll have to dig up the actual German, but his principle of arbitrariness comes up to or close to my idea of combinatorial creativity.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Um, in that lecture. But that was another, like, I saw that phrase and I'm like, the sense that he's talking about here is exactly that thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
essentially using two or three words to describe it in his conception
Hmm.
versus my own. But it's,
Yeah.
what is the concrete? And I'll have to like spend some time in German or German, Latin, and maybe some Greek to figure out what the new English word ought to be for this concept.
Yes. Well, it'd be great if
Or if it's not
it came from
if
Greek.
it's not a word in German, it could be a word in Japanese.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that too. But I've dug around in Japanese to see if I can find, because I have at least some passing facility in Japanese
Hmm.
but it's not.
Let me just.
Or if it's not a word in German, you mush four words together and make a
Yeah.
big long German word.
You're great.
Yeah.
Farvig Nuganize it.
Right. Yes.
I took too much German, and in English I run words together that shouldn't be run together on a regular basis. That and capitalize things that shouldn't be capitalized. I'm just like, German broke me.
There's got there I don't think I've ever heard anybody come up with a word, but I very often see, usually you'll see it in subject specific domains. So let's say we're in the note-taking world, and even aside from the fact that Germans would capitalize Zettelkasten as a word,
Yeah.
like people in the note-taking space will tend to capitalize it because it means something specific and it's important to them in their context. And so you'll see people in their own
Um,
context capitalize words because they're important, not because they should be capitalized. And there really needs to be a word for that, like capitalization of words that shouldn't be capitalized because they're important to you in your space. And I've never seen a defined word that meant that thing.
hmm,
And that's another one I'm looking for too, because I see examples of that all the time. And
yeah.
I highlight and annotate them, and I probably have some knucklehead phrase for it 10 different times of, you know, important capitalization or something stupid like that that
Hmm.
catch it. I
Hmm.
did drop this thing a few minutes ago, the Claude Shannon book, The
Ooh,
Bandwagon for you,
Yes, thank
Dan.
you. Thank you. I was
cool.
So,
what I was just looking for. I'm sorry, go ahead.
but it's an example. He created information theory as a concept in math and engineering and science
Right.
and in systems theory, and it got picked up and used in every subject in the 40s, 50s, into the 70s. And he wrote this article, The Bandwagon, essentially admonishing people to be very careful of taking his idea of information theory and trying to apply it to things like psychology or
Mhm.
psychology,
Right.
sociology. Like I was everywhere but certainly by the mid 50s when he wrote this paper, he
Yeah.
was like, use it, but be very careful in how you use it and why you're using it, because I see people applying it to things that I feel it has no actual useful use for.
Yeah.
And it's
Cool.
like, it became
And
such a
then it
thing in the
exploded
zeitgeist, like,
into a discipline. Yeah.
if you weren't using information theory in your archaeology work, like you just were not doing things properly.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The word I was looking for was another one of those German built up words. And Luhmann used it. And it related. The reason I was searching for it was that it's related to what you were talking about, Chris, about, combinatorial complexity. He talks about that when he's talking in the, I think, 1981 communicating with slipboxes
Hmm.
article, he says it's impossible to think without writing, and then he goes on to say, and that's the famous, you can't, writing is thinking thing that's always attributed to him. But then he goes on and actually says, at least it is impossible in any sophisticated or anschlussfähig fashion. Anschlussfähig, which can mean connectable. Nowadays, people usually translate it as networked, but it has
Hmm.
the word Anschluss in it, right? Which is, opening, but it's also Schluss is a key, right? So there's all of these kind of interesting little connotations
Yeah.
that kind of go into, using something, using a term like that.
Hmm.
That
Yeah, Chris
that
is.
semantic shift reminds me of the word silly, which 1,000 years ago used to mean like it had a religious connotation, a religious feeling. And now silly means, laughable, risible, funny, like
Mhm.
goofy, you know,
Yep.
silly. And no one ever thinks of the religious
Right.
phrase
Yeah.
ever
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
Just so archaic that, you
Mhm.
know.
Yep.
But
Or
when you think of
although
but when
maybe
you think of
maybe
its religious use ages ago in the word silly now, and I think about modern religion, like, yeah,
but
it's silly.
but maybe there's a connection, a vague connection to it in the idea of being scared silly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
or even like, because we've just gone through the Christmas holiday and all the cultural warriors, the Christian right, who want to say, oh, people are, you can't use Xmas to
Mhm.
describe Christmas. or you can't, why are we saying happy holidays? And they're totally sidelining the fact that the symbol Chi Rho was used for Christ.
Right.
And
By
because
Constantine, for crying out loud.
and because we were writing in English and not in Greek, we simplified the Chi Rho to just X. So Xmas actually really means Christ.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
has always, but we're just so stupid as moderns that we
Yep.
forget the history.
Yep.
Or people would say Happy Holy Day because
Yep.
there was one and only one holy day in December, and it was
Yep.
Christ's birthday
Yep.
in Christian Europe for centuries. And from that we get the word holiday, happy holiday.
Yep.
You're saying the same thing, but we've somehow lost the meaning of that term.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
my other favorite is everybody forgets that, when you say, good day, it's really Gott Day,
Right.
God's
Mhm.
day,
Right. Right.
and you're wishing them, or when you
Right.
say goodbye,
Right.
Gott bye,
Right.
which is the same in Spanish as adios,
Right.
to
Dios.
go with
Right. Yep.
God.
Yep. Yep.
It's
Vaya con
totally a
Dios.
religious phrase, but it's lost so much of its original religious meaning.
Yeah. Well,
And the
it's funny.
Christian right gets up in arms because they're so dumb.
Yeah.
They don't realize the history of any of the words they're using.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
so built into the culture, and somehow they're fighting against their own culture. I
Which
totally
they just don't
get
know well enough. Yeah. It's kind of funny. I
Yeah.
was in Austria last spring, early summer, and the young Austrians don't, but the old Austrians all still greet each other with Grüß Gott.
Yep.
And they don't, and they probably, I mean, and I learned it, when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I lived there. And so I used to just say it to everybody, and, and I never knew, I never thought about what it meant. And I'm sure that, by now it's just become, it's so automatic that, that these
Yeah.
elements, kind of these elements of the culture. But with that, we are at
Yeah, we're
12:05.
past time.
Yeah, we're out of
So next week, 3 chapters.
three chapters of common knowledge and the mysteries
Pinker.
of money, power, and everyday life. So
Well, the one interesting thing that I've noticed so far is he actually says this is one of the few books he's written recently that actually is within his academic wheelhouse.
and you
Which
can
I
kind
was
of
like,
tell it does have a little bit more rigor to it, I think. But it is good. But I think it is going to be more important to come to terms.
Yeah. By now, interesting ways it actually relates to this book we've just finished too. So
Yeah.
I don't know. And because we don't have another book on the ledger coming up after this, and it may only be a 3-week book, you got to figure out, Dan, which of the great books we're going to slip into the itinerary.
Okay, I wanted to respond.
Mm.
Yeah, you're right. I wanted to respond to that because you mentioned that in the comments. Would people really be interested in reading great books?
I totally would do it, or even
Or
if
would be
you
maybe a side club.
or either the side, or even if you did like once a month, we're going to do X number of chapters from this thing as it overlays. I would totally do that.
Would you want to do it chronologically or just pick things that seemed interesting?
We should just kind of pick something that's interesting, because picking interesting things is always more fun.
Because otherwise you never get past the first couple of volumes.
I will say there's a thing called the Catherine Project.
Okay.
That is a great books reading series outside of the collegiate atmosphere. And they do, I think a couple times a year, they pick, and they're about to start a new cohort, I think. But they've gone through thousands of people, and it's been around for 5+ years, and it's a little nonprofit. But they've got people who've gone through great books programs in college, and they're doing reading groups for the public.
Cool.
For free.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sign up and register and say, hey, I want to be in one of my, and they've gone from great book stuff, and now they've been adding some modern great books that aren't original great books, but that are interesting. I think Herman Hesse, I saw, was one of the
cool.
readings they wanted to do. But take a look at that model.
All right.
'Cause you might find some interesting things with respect to your um, ongoing education like platform.
Yep. All right. Well, yeah, that
Lifetime
would be
learners.
fun. I would like to do that. I would like to read some, yeah, some of that stuff and talk about it too. Although I do think that Immervarm and the other one that the other Empire book that might
There's
up against it might be
uh,
something good to look at for after we.
there's a third one along with those, which is Peak Human.
Okay.
That falls in the same by Johann Norberg.
Okay.
I had picked it up because it got recommended by a bunch of friends in Europe when I was looking at the Imor book.
Okay.
But it's what we can learn from the rise and fall of golden ages. And actually, I think it was a book that was in a list that Tim had shared.
Okay. That might be
Because I mentioned that I
kind
had
of a cultural counterpart then to specific, power and money and military kind of stuff that might be in the other ones.
What was
it covers Athens,
so we said
Rome.
Immerwar. What was the other book you were thinking of, Dan?
It was in the chat.
It's the Why Empires Fall, Rome, America, and the Future of the West. Yeah, Peak Human.
Cool.
That covers Athens, Rome, Abbasid Caliphate, Song China, Renaissance Italy, Dutch Republic, and Anglosphere.
Oh, I definitely need to read that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It kind of falls into the area of big history, but why the West rules for now by Ian Morris is kind of an. I've dipped into it a couple times in short little sections, but I really want to read it cover to cover sometime in the next year. And I think it kind of falls in that same realm of.
Cool. All right. Well, that is a lot to think about, and there's a lot in the chat too. A lot of links in the chat to follow too.
Yep.
A successful week.
Yep.
All right. So we will meet again next week. So we'll be kind of on a regular schedule, and we'll talk about the first few chapters of Pinker, and maybe I'll have some ideas about how to do some great book reading too.
Yeah, I think you could sucker a couple of us into it.
All right.
We talk about them all the time or relate stuff back. We may as well.
Yep.
Especially things that are maybe even not, not the Plato and Aristotle. Those would be fun, but some of the tangent things that are mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Next week.